with Louise Mombo.
Good evening. 6,000 protesters have rallied at Cottesloe Beach against the state government's shark cull plan. It was part of a national day of action as thousands more across the country demonstrated against a policy that activists say is damaging Australia's reputation.
6,000 Western Australians poured onto Cottesloe Beach today for the biggest anti-shark cull rally the state has ever seen. Protesters came armed with homemade placards and the Premier was on a hook of his own. But the vocal crowd wasn't relying on signs alone to get their message across. The reality of the controversial policy hitting home for some.
Please just change the policy. This is not the right way to protect people.
Colin Barnett has vowed to stand by the policy in the face of mounting opposition, but activists are confident their efforts have not been in
I just think it's not too late to take him down. I think it's not too late for him to change his mind, and this is what all these people are here for today.
Stop this ridiculous thing for culling these poor sharks. It's absolutely ridiculous.
They don't have the research, they don't have the facts.
Yesterday, the first drumlines were dropped in waters off Perth. Today, 2 undersized tiger sharks were hooked. One was already dead when the Fisheries Department arrived. The carcass dumped several kilometres at sea. Rally organiser Ross Weir told the crowd today that if they want to help, they can, by suiting up and getting in the water.
We will get you out there on the water, we'll keep you safe, we'll make sure you know how to stay within the confines of the law, how to stay out of trouble, and we will stop this hunt.
Several politicians joined the rally, lending their voice to a cause that's gaining momentum.
We stand today in solidarity with the 100 or more scientists who have written an open letter to the government saying this is bad policy, it's wrong, it won't work.
The controversial catch and kill policy has more than just West Aussie protesters seeing red. United in anger, 16 coordinated rallies were held across the country today. At Sydney's Manly Beach, more than 2,000 people denounced the cull.
The people have spoken! Do not cull sharks!
Similar scenes in Queensland, which has its own drumlines in place off Brisbane, as thousands turned out to protest on the Gold Coast.
We do not accept the slaughter of innocent animals in this nation.
Also a long way from the culling, Victorian passions still run deep. Hundreds gathered in Melbourne on the steps of the State Library and at Torquay Beach, furious at a policy they say has national consequences.
We are increasingly being known around the world as the Cull country.
But today's nationwide demonstration is unlikely to sway the state government, which insists the catch and kill plan is the best way to save lives. El Miteros, 9 News.
Meantime, as fisheries officers continued their hunt for sharks today, protesters tried to sabotage the project. It comes as 2 undersized sharks were hooked, one discovered already dead.
The first kill on drumlines off Perth beaches. This 2-metre tiger shark was hooked 1 kilometre off Leighton Beach.
And this is exactly what activists have been fearing all along. A 2-metre tiger shark pulled in, undersized but dead.
The carcass discovered by fisheries officers just before 7 this morning. According to the state government, sharks of this size are to be released. This one was dumped 12 k's off Ocean Reef. There were mixed reactions from Leighton Beach swimmers where the shark was caught.
I don't support it. I don't think you should be killing sharks. I think that we're in their environment.
I would hate to think they were coming down swimming with friends or family and, someone got taken.
It wasn't the only catch of the day. This 2.3 metre tiger shark was caught off Scarborough at 10:30 this morning. It was released alive a few hundred metres further out to sea. So far, only tiger sharks have been hooked on the drumlines off Perth, but according to state government records, the species may have only been responsible for 1 attack since 1980.
It's just indiscriminate, this policy.
Police were called after a 19-year-old woman chained herself to a fisheries vessel. She was marched from the dock and charged with trespassing, but activists say It's only the beginning of their anti-shark cull campaign.
And a moving tribute to a teen killed as he crossed a road with his girlfriend.
He always loved her and died loving her.
From the studios of 7 Perth, Blake Johnson.
Good evening. More than 6,000 people packed Cottesloe Beach today to protest against the state government's shark catch and kill policy. It was one of more than a dozen protests nationwide. Today, 2 more sharks were caught on drumlines. Both were undersized. Amelia Broome begins our coverage.
Off Leighton Beach this morning, a lifeless 2-metre tiger shark is dragged from the water. It's undersized but is already dead. It's a scene that's fuelled anger right across Australia. This was Cottesloe Beach today.
Riots! Riots! Riots and riots! At the moment they're killing babies just off here, you know.
With the drum lines clearly in view from the shore, the protesters made sure they were heard.
Hey everybody, make some noise!
Ill-conceived, ill-thought-out, unscientific policy on the part of Premier Colin Barnett.
Colin Barnett wasn't at the rally, he's on business overseas.
So I've been hanging outside our house since the last one. And yeah, we've had to reinforce them a little bit this time because of the wind.
Some made sure that when they arrived, they were noticed.
The marine environment needs to be protected, so we thought we'd dress it up a little bit and come and show our support.
Even kids found their own way to show their support.
We want them to stop killing sharks and to say that when they open their teeth, that's their smile, to show you.
This man supports the cull, but he didn't impress the 6,000-strong crowd.
Some of people might think you're pretty brave.
Surfer Gary and his twin boys also support the cull and watched the protest from their boat.
That was great, yeah. It was good to actually get our point of view across, in view of so many people who have an alternative point of view that I don't agree with.
There's no doubt today's protest was a lot bigger than the one held here last month, and they seem to be even more passionate. Some of the speakers here today were brought to tears.
Thank you all for being here today and for doing your duty.
It started early for one protester, 4:30 a.m. A 19-year-old woman used steel thumb locks to attach herself to a fisheries boat in Fremantle. Firefighters had to cut her free. She'll be charged with trespassing. In Meelup, down south, it was more peaceful, a small crowd of 300 spelling out their view.
I think this is totally unnecessary because there are options where sharks don't need to be killed, and I think that's where the upsetting bit comes in for me.
There were more than a dozen other protests around the country. 2,000 people were at Manly Beach in Sydney. Many more rallied in Melbourne, Adelaide and Hobart, and protesters say there's more to come. There's been no response from the state government.
It's their water!
Amelia Broome, 7 News.
While protesters rallied against the shark catch and kill policy, fisheries continue to check drum lines along our beaches. A total of 4 sharks have now been caught off Perth, all undersized.
After a slight delay caused by a protester, fisheries began checking drumlines at 6:30 this morning. 15 minutes in, they had their first catch. This time there was no struggle. Believed to be a 2-metre tiger shark, it appeared to have been strangled by rope around its neck. It was taken on board, measured, then dumped 15 kilometres out to sea.
And sharks need to swim in order to breathe. And that's why we're seeing these beautiful sharks being brought up there this morning. It's disgusting.
2 hours later, a kilometre off Scarborough Beach, another shark was pulled to the surface. This one smaller than the last. It was released alive. Since drumlines were set along Perth beaches yesterday, 4 sharks have now been captured, all of them undersized. Today, the government refused to comment on the dead shark, saying they won't be giving regular updates on the drumlines.
If you start killing every shark over 3 metres, well, you're actually destroying the entire population.
It's like driving a species to extinction.
Researchers say other countries have found ways to reduce shark attacks without killing them.
The Department of Fisheries have all the skills that we need to adopt the Brazilian model, which would see these large sharks captured, handled carefully, and then removed offshore after they've been tagged.
Rebecca O'Donovan, 7 News.
Stop the Cull. Thousands protest across the country against WA's shark hunting policy. Holding the line out in the water, the catch continues. A mother and her kids escape a ferocious house fire. And a familiar face welcomes the first of our Aussie athletes in Sochi.
This is 10 Eyewitness News with Kimberly Sokov.
Good evening. First tonight, thousands have gathered at Cottesloe and around the country in protest against the WA shark cull. Despite the protests, the hunt continued today. Our reporter Juliet Wills joins us now. Juliet, just how big was the demonstration?
Kimberly, Cottesloe Beach is quiet right now, but earlier it was a very different story. A sea of people crammed onto the beach, many wearing blue and white, all here to oppose the state government's catch and kill shark policy. It's just over a week since it came into effect and the second day since baiting began in Perth. Today's protest began well before the crowds gathered here. At daybreak, an activist locked herself to a fisheries boat at Fremantle Fishing Harbour. Police, firefighters and ambulance all arrived. 7 firefighters had to board the vessel and use a grinder to cut her free. The 19-year-old Fremantle woman was issued with a move-on notice. She'll be summoned at a later date on trespass. Fisheries boats tasked with checking the lines were escorted by police due to fears for their safety. Now, just before 7 this morning, a tiger shark was pulled up dead on a drumline at Leighton Beach. It was dumped 15 kilometres offshore, the death of an undersized shark giving more ammunition to the protesters. Another shark was pulled up at Scarborough. The tiger shark was undersized. It survived and was released. Now, many swimmers have expressed some concern that the released sharks are not tagged. But for the very latest on what's happening right now, Rebecca Munro is in the 10 chopper.
Yeah, well, Juliet, at this stage, we can't see any sign of a fisheries boat out here this afternoon. Just a short time ago, I was told by the Department of Fisheries that they are supposed to be monitoring these lines until 6 o'clock tonight. But, I mean, conditions are fairly rough. It's likely that it was called off. What we do know is that no other sharks were caught up in these drum lines this afternoon, apart from, of course, those 2 small ones that were caught earlier today. The lines are still in the water and they will stay in overnight until fisheries officers can check them once again at first light tomorrow morning. And this is going to continue right up until April. As I said, conditions have been pretty rough for fisheries officers down here, but it seems that the 10 drum lines from Port Beach all the way down to Ocean Reef haven't seemed to have deterred swimmers. Up here in the chopper, we've seen young kids attending surf life-saving classes and swimmers competing in the Rottnest Swim. A large group were practising in the water today, so it's definitely not, these drum lines have not kept swimmers out of the water. Juliet?
Thanks very much, Rebecca. Now, the protest here at Cottesloe was just one of a number of protests across the nation. Alicia Banner has more.
They say they're not protesters, but instead protectors of the kings of the ocean.
Can I have everybody please turn around, point at that fisheries boat and tell them, leave our sharks alone. Again. It is crucial that we protect what healthy population of sharks we have in Australia today before our waters end up like the rest of the world's.
We want money into research, not money into killing.
6,000 people descended on Cottesloe Beach, the epicentre of the anger.
We are going to rise as one and wash this Premier and his hateful policy down the drain and into the sewer where he and his bully boys belong.
And that outrage united thousands across the country. In Melbourne, protesters paraded in the streets and on the beaches.
We are going to put at risk some of the most vulnerable and threatened species on this planet.
While others got creative in Adelaide, crowds raised their voices in Sydney.
The people have spoken. Do not cull sharks.
Desperate to do all they can to change the WA government's mind.
I mean, in my opinion, you've got more chance of being hit by someone drink driving, being king hit even these days.
This is what I'd like to say to the Western Australian governments. You're stupid. You just don't know what you've said. You don't know what you're doing.
The rallies held across the country today have made up the largest protest in history to save one animal. Anthony Joyce was attacked last year. He says he knows better than most the ocean belongs to the sharks.
72 drum lines, what's that going to do? There's millions of sharks out there. You know, the shark nets don't do anything.
Protests are getting bigger, and I think people are just going to keep getting angrier if he keeps going ahead with this idiotic drumlining idea.
Every drop of blood in my heart and every salty tear in my eyes tells me this is wrong.
The activists' final message: they will not stop until the Barnett government does the same.
Is there water? Stop the slaughter!
Alicia Banner, 10 Eyewitness News.
So at the end of day 8, the tally is 1 shark caught, shot and killed, 1 shark caught and found dead, and 3 sharks caught and released. Kimberly?
Juliet Wills, thank you.
Thousands turn out to protest against the shark kill while the catching continues. The battle intensifies for Kevin Rudd's old seat of Griffith. Top speed in the top end. The road without limits. And French fried, Australia down 2-0 in the Davis Cup.
There it is.
Good evening, Pamela Medlin with ABC News. Thousands of people have protested at Cottesloe Beach and at rallies in other states against the WA government's shark catch and kill policy. And while they vowed to continue the fight until the controversial policy is dumped, it was business as usual for fisheries officers monitoring baited drumlines at metropolitan beaches.
Rights! Rights! Rights and rights!
They protested on the sand and took their message to the sky. More than 6,000 people on Cottesloe Beach.
Morally and factually, this cull is deeply wrong. We will stop it. We will stop the cull.
It is critical that we send a strong message not only to Colin Barnett but to Tony Abbott, because he is complicit in this with Colin Barnett.
Some protesting because they believe the baited drumlines are creating a greater risk for beachgoers.
My children are good nippers, so that's putting their lives at risk because they're bringing sharks closer to the shore.
Others worried about what the rest of the world thinks of the controversial policy.
All I can say to Colin Barnett is, as a Liberal supporter, Colin Barnett, you've let us down big time.
One of the things that stands out when you talk to the protesters who've come here today is that it's a really mixed crowd. These people have come in here from suburbs across the metropolitan area.
And it wasn't just Cottesloe. Similar protests were held at other WA beaches and in other states. From Torquay in Victoria to Manly in New South Wales. The protests reigniting concerns about shark control programs in other states.
The policy of Queensland and New South Wales governments results in sharks being killed and lots of other wildlife being killed.
Earlier in the day in Perth, police called in firefighters to cut free a protester who'd locked herself onto a Department of Fisheries vessel. But despite the massive show of opposition, fisheries officers continued their work off metropolitan beaches. 1 shark on a baited hook at Scarborough released because it was shorter than the required 3 metres. Another, also undersized, died on the hook. Fisheries Minister Ken Baston says he respects people's right to protest, but insists something had to be done after 7 fatal shark attacks in WA in 3 years. Jessica Strutt, ABC News.